she's in Holland. She's not in Germany at the time. I mean, and thirdly, her name's not Anna. It's Anne, right? Not even, these are a Pulitzer Prize winning historian writing with the Second World War. That's his. So, like, it's weird. And there is exactly one Holocaust museum in North America until 1984. And that's this museum in LA that opens by accident in the early 60s. And I tell the story of the group of people who founded this museum. And what the whole chapter is about, how everything changes at an exact moment in the late 70s. And the Holocaust goes from being something we never talked about to something we finally could figure out how to talk about. And it is an example of a kind of how a cultural narrative can change in an instant. And I find that I became very fascinated with the power of these kinds of common narratives that we have that permit us or forbid us from having certain kinds of conversations.
What propelled the change?
You just want me to give away every
aspect. It's a great story.
You won't be happy until
There's
no one will have to read my book. You're like, do you just give away?
I've made you
go
tell
and
two
see a
stories.
thriller
Listen, there's more than two stories in here.
You're gonna love this movie. You're not gonna believe what happens at the end. The person you think is the killer, she didn't kill anybody. It was the butler the whole time.
Then you
must be really popular, and then you take out your phone and it's just you, and they're like, "Who is this person? She's giving away the secrets." No, we have to talk about something else. Not. You really want to know what happens?
Do you really want to know what happens?
All right.
It's their show.
There are these two guys. They work for NBC in the late 70s, and they're walking down the street, and they see a book on the Second World War in a bookshelf, in a bookstore. And one guy turns to the other and says, "Do you think they're ready?" And they're talking about, is America ready to finally talk about what happened during the war? Because this guy had relatives who died in the Holocaust. So he knows what happened, but he's aware of the fact that no one ever talks about it. And the guys, they go, yeah, we think they're finally ready. So they create this mini-series for NBC called The Holocaust. Now, originally it wasn't going to be called The Holocaust. It was going to be called The Family Weiss. It's starring a very young Meryl Streep and a very young James Woods. It's 4 hours, and it runs on 4 episodes, runs on 4 consecutive nights. They don't think it's going to be successful. In fact, the NBC brass is very worried about it. At the very last minute, they rename it The Holocaust, which is a term that hadn't been used to describe what happened in Germany. It was a translation. The Israelis had used the word Shoah, and the Shoah Museum was in Israel, and Holocaust is a kind of rough translation of Shoah. So they decided, we're going to call this show, we're going to call it Holocaust, The Family Weiss, as opposed to just The Family Weiss. And it runs on 4 consecutive nights in, I think, the spring of 1979. And half of the country tunes in. 50% of the American population tune in to watch this. And people are like, oh my God, that's what happened, right? And boom, it just overnight, so in the aftermath of that show, that's when you start getting Holocaust museums. The National Holocaust Museum opens, I think, in 1984 as a direct result of the kind of awakening of interest. And then following that, there are scores of Holocaust memorials and museums across America. Only the one in LA predates that show. And then that show is shown in Germany. The Germans had even done a better job of kind of obliterating conversation about the Holocaust. And they're so spooked by the show that they show it on this regional channel late at night. It ends at like 1 a.m. They think no one's going to watch it. It's a sensation. The entire country tunes in. And the entire country, people, it's even a bigger deal than in America. People literally didn't know this had happened. And it creates this kind of incredible national explosion of awareness about what had happened, and it sparks this whole national conversation. And the German kind of hyper awareness of the Holocaust begins in that moment. But my point is, it begins with a story, right? It's a story told a fictional story, told by a series of gifted storytellers on television that has the effect of changing the international conversation about this event.
I'm Pia Chattopadhyay, and if you're just joining us here on the Sunday Magazine, today we're presenting my conversation with Malcolm Gladwell. It's been nearly 25 years since the journalist and author put out his debut book, The Tipping Point. Well, now Malcolm's returning to the subject of social epidemics, but this time he's looking at their darker side. Malcolm's latest book is called Revenge of the Tipping Point, and we spoke on stage at Toronto's Winter Garden Theatre this past October at an event hosted by the University of Toronto's Rotman School of Management. Now, let's return to my conversation with Malcolm Gladwell. I'll ask you about our country. Talk about overstories. What's the overstory of Canada, do you think?
Wow. Why are you asking me? I haven't lived here in 30 years. What do you think it is? Am I going to get in trouble?
No, I think you've thought about it.
Well, no, I mean...
And I think you have a perspective on this because you haven't lived here in 30 years, so you can see it from the outside.
Yeah. Well, whenever I'm in America and I'm asked for my opinion on American politics, I always answer, I'm Canadian. And everyone, they all laugh, so they clearly have an idea of what that means. I never know exactly why they're laughing. It's always, is it at me or with me? I don't know. You know? Well, I mean, I'm just going to give you exactly the stereotypes about Canadians that you know. I will say I'm amazed, the Canadian openness to outsiders, newcomers, of which I am one. I'm an immigrant. My whole family are immigrants to Canada. I would have said that was and I know that's kind of
changing
a little bit, but I think that all of us should pat ourselves on the back first. That you can't have that overstory forever. No one has ever had that overstory forever. And Canada had an openness to outsiders overstory that lasted like 4 times longer than any other country I'm aware of. It's an extraordinary achievement. I would have thought it would have ended. That idea that we welcome everyone and that that's the best thing possible for our country. America has that period lasts in 20-year increments, if that, 15-year increments. And then they have a massive backlash, right? And it takes years to get them out of the backlash. Canada, how long has that been going on? 100?
Yeah.
It's pretty good, And even, I was reading the kind of Trudeau saying, basically, I've heard you guys were cutting it back from
Didn't get the balance right, yeah.
Was it to 300,000?
Down 21% over the next 2 years.
You're still winning you would think in America it'd be like, we're cutting it to 0. And they did. By the way, in the Trump years, the number of refugees taken by America essentially went to 0, right? That's what backlash looks like from my perspective. Cutting it 20% is not backlash. That's like a mild mid-course correction. You should, I think people think that Canada's over. No. If they cut it to 0, it's over. And they're not cutting it to 0. We went through that, during the Trump years, and we will go through it again, I fear.
I think you're all familiar, Malcolm, in addition to writing 8 books.
Yeah.
Yep. Has a podcast. Yes, we're familiar. Revisionist history. It's excellent. Again, it's really based in storytelling. And I'm wondering, when you shifted to working in podcasts, how did you look at story? Because that's what we do in journalism. We tell stories about the world around us.
Yeah. I mean, it's a way better storytelling medium, isn't it? Audio.
And radio, so yes.
Yes. And it took me a long time to realize how great audio was and how much fun you can have in audio and how much more forgiving your audience is. You can say stuff that would not work on the page totally works in audio. And I don't know, I still haven't entirely figured out why that is, why the audio audience is so much more generous. We did 4 episodes on what was wrong with The Little Mermaid. 4 episodes. If I told you, if you were my publisher and I said, I got a great idea for your book, it's going to be a critique of not the whole just the ending of The Little Mermaid. He's like, what are you doing? But for each of those episodes was maybe 45 minutes long. That's 3 hours. I got people to devote 3 hours of their life to, it's maybe the greatest thing I've ever done. For those of you, I love telling the story. I was reading some law journal, and I come across this article by this law professor, Northwestern, and her specialty is contract law. And the whole article, serious, every other, article in this journal is like, a learned, scholarly thing. And her thing is basically, it begins. So I'm watching The Little Mermaid with my kids, and we get to the point where the Little Mermaid enters into a contract with Ursula, the witch, in which she gives over her soul in exchange for a chance to go up into the earth and try and win the heart of the handsome prince. And she's like, that's not how contract law works. I'm sorry, that's not, first of all, she's a minor. Secondly, no court would allow, she's incensed by the notion that the Little Mermaid is teaching kids, vulnerable children, something profoundly erroneous about the way the law works. And so she writes this, it's angry. I mean, and I'm reading this, I'm like, this is just the best thing I've ever read in my entire life. So I called up a friend of mine, my friend Britt, who's a screenwriter. I was like, Britt, I have something really important to share with you. Do you remember The Little Mermaid? And she's like, do I remember The Little Mermaid? When she was a kid growing up in Orlando, she used to tie her feet together and jump into the pool so she could mimic being a mermaid. That was her life. And
Do you know any boring people? Wonderful character.
Britt was all in on The Little Mermaid. And I said, Britt, are you aware of how deeply flawed the ending is? She's like, wait a second. And she's like, going back in time to when she was 8 years old. She's like, oh my God. It's because it's all about the Little Mermaid, who we are presented with her at the beginning as this kind of spirited, willful, smart, girl who's trying to shape the world in her own image. And then she gets into trouble, and what has to happen? She has to be saved by the prince. Like, who did this? It's like nonsense. Like, why are we showing this to our children? So anyway, we got very worked up about this. And so Britt rewrote the ending in a way that I thought was compelling. But it took us 3 episodes to get there because we had to work through all the implications of what went wrong with fairy tales. I have this friend named Angus. He's studying neuroscience, and his parents are really excited. My son's going to be a neuroscientist. And then he gets sidetracked and ends up in a English PhD program, and his parents were just like, Angus, what did you do? It was going so well for the family. But Angus has this grand theory about what went wrong with fairy tales. And he locates it somewhere in the 17th century. And it was was a pivotal moment that goes wrong with fairy tales, which is, are you fine with this digression? Because it's going to go on for a while.
It's going somewhere.
This is, by the way, so much more interesting than Donald Trump. So for the longest time, if you look at fairy tales, there was no connection between your goodness, your essential goodness as a person, and your worthiness, your attractiveness, whatever, and your outcome in the world. Basically, in the original fairy tales, you could be someone who was downtrodden, not very nice, not kind of beautiful, and a really great thing could happen to you. And not as a result of your own actions, but just chance. Life was a lottery. And sometimes, if you won the bottom, you won the lottery. That was the original fairy tale. And then fairy tales take this dark turn in the 17th century, and they become morality plays in which good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people. And Angus's point is, this is a real problem. Because if you don't fit the mode of a good person, then you come to believe that the world is going to turn out badly for you. So we then enter into this Disney universe where it's only the beautiful princess who has a happy ending, right? And the Little Mermaid the problem with Little Mermaid is it's that narrative. She's she has to be rescued by the handsome prince, but the good thing happens to her because she is beautiful, and ultimately the beautiful people win. And Agnes's point is, who wants to live in a world where the beautiful people win? We don't. No one does. And so I enlisted him. And then I used to live in this apartment, in a little apartment in West Village, and there was a penthouse. And who lived in the penthouse but Glenn Close? So once I got over how starstruck I was, I became friendly with Glenn Close. So we're in the middle of this, and I call her up. I'm like, Glenn, you got to be Ursula in our performance. And then once I had her, I got Jodie Foster. And Jodie Foster was like, I'm coming. We did this up in Hudson. She's like, I'm coming to, she gets in the car, drives up. It was just hilarious. We had the star-studded performance. Anyway, my point is, no one's buying that book, but people listen to that podcast. That's the point.
Duly noted. How to save journalism. You're critical of elite education. Now, Malcolm, there are 1,000 people in this room.
Yeah.
Guess what a lot of them have? Yes, 10 fingers and 10 toes, you're right. Yeah. A lot of them have done post-secondary education. They've gone to the top schools in Canada. Maybe a few of them.
Yeah, but
some of them maybe in the United States. Everyone calm down. Malcolm, calm down. Do not take issue with Canadian post-secondary education.